You want me to run the test here in the meantime?
Yep, you go ahead and run it. Yeah, just type it in. Yep, run that.
Hey there, everyone. Are we live, Caitlin?
We are live. Go for it.
Fantastic. Welcome to another community pairing session. Today, Shane, who does Drupal stuff for Gatsby, is pairing with Yaron, and they can tell you all about this Drupal bug.
Thanks, Madeline. Yep. So I got Yaron here. It's Yaron, correct?
Yaron, yeah, it's correct.
Yaron, okay. And I'm Shane. I'm a staff engineer at Gatsby, and Yaron has encountered a bug with Gatsby source Drupal and some issues with sourcing files from Amazon S3 rather than just using Drupal's local file system. And we're going to walk through what the problem was, and then from there we'll walk through the solution. And then the current state of the PR is there's a failing test that we're going to also attempt to debug here live and see if we can get it working and hopefully get that pushed up and possibly even committed to the Gatsby repo. So Yaron, if you want to go ahead and start by talking about the problem, we can probably get started there.
Yeah, sure. So what happened was, let me open the window. Okay, so I set my Drupal site to run with basic authentication. And before everything was working correctly, I had pages on S3 and it downloaded and everything was fine. But when I changed my Gatsby config, let's see it here, I added a basic auth. Then what happened, let's see if it's, then what happened, the images didn't download. I will demonstrate. Let's run Yaron develop. Yeah. So I'm running Yaron develop. There will be some console logs that I added, but it's a normal Yaron develop.
So this is running a local Gatsby site on your local
Yes.
system, correct? Okay.
Correct.
And it looks like it's fetching data from a Drupal site that's hosted on Docker, right, on your local system?
Yes. Now what happens, it builds the schema, and it downloaded the pages, the images. Now I will open the GraphQL and we will see, like, I will demonstrate the problem. Okay. So here I made a query that fetches one content type that stores its images on this field image, which is on S3. And here I added another content type just for testing. It contains field image local, which stores its data on my local file system. Here I'm getting the data, local file, and I have the absolute path, meaning that it was downloaded locally and it can be used by the Gatsby image plugin. Here, local file is null. That was the bug. Why the file on S3, the images on S3 are not downloaded.
And this worked, just to be clear, this worked before you added basic auth. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. If I remove the basic auth, it works. If I use basic auth, it doesn't work. There was a problem that was caused by adding basic auth to the Gatsby source Drupal. To continue to explain finding the bug?
Yep, good. Yeah, go ahead. So just basic auth is definitely useful too for Drupal sites, because if you don't want all your content to be available publicly, you want to be able to use basic auth. So this is definitely a good bug to surface.
Exactly, because I wanted to store my site online on the web, but I don't want its content to appear on the web. I want it to be available only to the site admin, to the site content administrator, and I want the Gatsby to source the content. So that's why I put basic auth. Now I started to debug it, putting different console logs around the Gatsby source Drupal. What I discovered was that put here create remote file node. I added a console log here. Yeah, and I put a list of all the URLs that are about to be downloaded. So there was no problem there. The URLs were fetched. We can see it. Let's go back to the list. Every image file you receive the about to remote download URL, but it wasn't downloading. When I went through the code, I arrived to this part in the code in normalize that actually downloads the file. This function here, and I console logged the node that it downloads, and then I checked what happens here. So when the auth is set up, if the basic auth option is set up, it uses this object in this function, create remote file node. It actually uses the auth that we supplied for basic auth. And that auth is not right for downloading from S3. S3 does not use this auth, and that's why it failed. It's easy to differentiate between files that are stored on S3 and files that are stored on the local directory. It's a test that you can perform here. This is what I added, console log node. We can see the difference. I will show you. All the files here are stored on S3, and we can see it when we print node URI. We see the value S3, and then the file system and the location. And the last file that I put, for example, will be this one that's stored publicly. So that would be the test. I added here a URI prefix that we can retrieve from node URI value and to match with a regular expression. And the test is file type would be the match. And here in basic auth, if it equals to an object and file path is set to public, then use basic auth. If not, use an empty object. And that fixes the problem.
Great, yeah. And so since S3 doesn't require Drupal's basic auth, since it's just available publicly, we don't want to pass that auth object to S3, but we do want to make sure it's passed to anytime you're requesting a file directly from Drupal. And so one thing that, Yaron, we discussed, so we can go through this, we don't have to do this right now, but we can come back to it, is Drupal has public file systems, but they also have private file systems, and they also have temporary file systems that are available. So we are going to want to add a check to make sure that we pass the auth object into any of those three prefixes. So if it's public : or temporary : or private : it'll pass the auth. But then S3 or any other remote file system that someone might use, this should work for. So that's the good thing about this fix, is it's not just going to apply to just S3. It should work for other remote file hostings that don't require authentication.
Yes.
Did you have anything else you wanted to demo with it, or do we want to?
I can show you run the fix and show you the proper way after it's downloaded, just to demonstrate. So here, this is before the fix. We see the local file is null. Now I will open my development. Let's see. This I commented out. I will restore the check. So now it's checking with file type is public. And if so, sends the basic auth. If not, doesn't. And now I will run Yaron develop again. And we will see that the files are being downloaded. Okay. Okay, now we see that the absolute path is not null.
Great. So now you can use that file, just like you could use any other file or image in Gatsby,
Yes.
Gatsby image.
Yes. Now I have the file and I can do what I want with it.
Great. Yeah, now that's definitely a good fix there. So do you want to walk through making the change to make it work for private and temporary now, and then we can, or actually maybe
I'll do it later if you want.
maybe it'd be a good idea to talk about now that once you found that fix, the process of you submitting the PR, and we could even pull that PR up so anyone
Sure.
viewing can see the PR, and then we can go through the process of some of the tests that were failing, and then we can kind of build off of that.
So that's the PR. What I did, I cloned the Gatsby repository. I forked to like another fork of this repository. I made my fix. I commit and pushed it, and then I ran the pull request, and that's where I was stuck because maybe I can see the tests here that were failing. So the first test that was failing was a lint problem. This I fixed. I think it was easy to read why it failed. I don't see it now, but like the errors were clear.
Yeah. So there are quite a few tests that run on each pull request. So the first one was just a linting. I'm assuming some code formatting changes that just needed to be updated. And since you pushed new updates, it doesn't show them in that section right there. But then there was also a secondary failure too, correct?
The failures that we see now.
Yes.
Yeah. So there were a few tests that failed, and I don't know really the process. How can I read properly like what failed? How can I run it locally? And just like, how do I get this fixed to actually pass the unit testing?
Yeah, can you go up to the top of the PR and just click on? Oh, yep. Sorry to interrupt you here. It's getting a little internet slowdown. It seems like. Can you go to the files change just so we can just look at the few lines that you did change?
Yes.
Okay, so those are the changes we just walked through. Can you go back to the conversation tab, and let's see if we can read the results of that test. If you go to just conversation and you scroll down to where it says those tests, can you click on the details of go to that second one there, the unit test node. Yeah, go ahead and click on that. And then if we scroll down, so those are just some 404 failures. Those weren't causing the build to break. And so you might need to, can you increase the font size just a little bit? It might be a little small, but that's right there is where we're looking, is that red part right there.
Here.
Yep. So you can see that the test, it's in Gatsby source Drupal, which is the plugin we're modifying. It's the download files was the test, and it expected an object containing URL with that specific path. It's just a test path. So there are tests that are running that are essentially mocking file downloads. And since we changed a little bit of how the file download process works, we need to make sure we just update these tests to match what is expected. So it's looking for this secondary image, and it only received one object, and it only received one called main image, and it never received secondary image. So I think the next step is we could actually look at what is running with these tests, and we can start debugging from there and trying to figure out how do we get this download files test to actually work.
So this you do on the ID. You leave the GitHub page and you go on the ID and.
Yep, let's go into the IDE where you have the Gatsby repository would be a good one.
Yes,
And
sure.
let's go into Gatsby the Gatsby source Drupal plugin, which is under packages. And we'll just start kind of digging into what these tests are doing. And from
so
there,
Gatsby source Drupal. Gatsby source Drupal here.
Yep.
Okay.
And then inside source, there's a tests folder.
Yeah.
And let's go ahead and click on the index.js test. That file looks like it's highlighted down a little bit.
Yeah.
And then also while you're in there, we're going to need, under the fixtures folder, we'll open the file.json because I know we're going to need to look at that one. But if we go into that index file, so essentially this is what's running to test Gatsby source Drupal. So this first part at the top is looks like it's just going to pull in any of those fixtures.json files. And so that's somewhat simulating how it would reach out to Drupal and pull in JSON from Drupal's JSON API. So we need to make sure that the data that's actually in these files is going to match what Drupal would actually send back from JSON API. And you can see if we go into that file.json file that you have open, it's going to create or mock pull in data for two different files. So a file 1 with this main image.png and then a file 2 with secondary image.png. And so if we go back to that index.js file, that test, let's kind of walk through a little bit what this is doing. So, I'm actually relatively new to using Jest and tests, so I'm certainly not an expert, but we can walk through what this is doing. And Yaron, feel free to ask questions or chime in too if you see anything that I'm missing.
Sure. What I understood from what you said is that actually this mock was causing the problem.
Yes.
Secondary file.
Yep. So I believe there's that mock data doesn't have so if we go to your code, actually, can we pull up your code change?
Here it's missing the URI.
Yes.
The value actually.
Yes.
The value.
So I think what's happening is that second file in that mock data. So let's go through how this code's going to run, but let's go back to that file.json file real quick. Or actually, could you pull it up side by side so we can look at the file.json file on the one side?
I'm not sure how I do it side by side.
You're right.
I'm not sure.
I guess I don't use WebStorm, so. Yeah, if not, I'm used to VS Code where if you click on the tab, you can open it in a split view.
Is there a split view here?
Split horizontally.
Yeah,
split and right maybe.
Okay, yeah.
Or
right.
I guess either way, yeah, that'll work. So now if we go to the changes you made, we can figure out why this test is now all of a sudden failing. So on line 41 in the normalize.js file, it's looking for node.url. So it's going to essentially go into this attributes part of the data and pull the URL. So that's going to work for this first file that the test data is for. But then on line 42, we're checking if node.uri is an object. And so the first file doesn't have a URI attribute, but that second file does have a URI attribute. So then it's going to run that code, which is where you kind of changed a few lines here. And so it's going to first get the URL, which that line's going to work. But the next line where you're doing that, we're doing this regular expression, it's going to look for that node.uri.value, and it's not going to be able to find, there's no .value there. And the reason, so Drupal is always going to send back a .value or a value attribute, but our data this is just mock data, so it doesn't have all the data that Drupal would typically send. We don't have that value attribute added, which is what's causing the test to all of a sudden stop failing. Is that your
we
understanding as
should-
well?
Yes. So we could fix this, but actually by taking the console log that I logged into the terminal that shows the right structure of one of those files, like we're talking about S3, so it would be something like that. We just need to add the URL, the value is what's missing.
Yeah, exactly. And so what we would probably want to do here is we may want to add a third file that would, so one will be public, one will be from S3, and then we can test that this is actually going to work. So then it should work for all three files, should then should show up when we run our tests.
Okay, and here we should also add a value like for a public.
Yeah.
file
So I would
system.
add a public one for that first one, and then let's add a new test, example data file that can be sourced from S3. And then that way we can
Okay.
test that, it'll actually download something that's mocked from Drupal and then something that's mocked from S3.
Okay. So the first one represents a public local file.
Yeah, so I think that first file is okay. That one's not failing because it doesn't have a URI object.
Sure.
I don't know if Drupal would ever send back data in that way anymore, but maybe there's certain versions of Drupal that would. I think most will always have a URI object if I remember correctly, but that's not causing the failure, so I don't think we need to change that. I think it's just adding public to that, I think, is what we need.
So that's what we'll do. I'll add a public here. So we need a URI. No, we have the URI. Sorry, we just need a value.
Yeah.
Just the value.
And then for the name, it's just going to be just that. And you shouldn't need the folder. That folder name shouldn't need to be there. So this on its own should cause the test to now pass. So I think then the next step would be, let's see if we can get this test to run locally so we can actually try it out and make sure that all the tests are passing. And then perhaps we can add one more file then to get, make sure that if it did have S3, it's not going to fail, which it shouldn't, but we'll want to add the data just in case there are future changes that could, cause failures down the road.
Sure. So now I'm here in the Gatsby source Drupal folder.
Okay, so I think you tried to install Jest globally, and I think there might be seems like that's not working for some reason. It's giving you some other error. So let's try to actually use when you run npm install or you run yarn install on the Gatsby repo, it should install basically a compiled version or a version of Jest we can run locally in this repo. So go ahead and type // twice, and then go to node modules, and then .bin. So actually it should be added to a .bin folder, and then see if there's a Jest in there. All right, and then if we put a space, I think if I remember right, we want to tell it to run it in the current directory. It might do that by default, but I normally just put a / so it runs it in the current directory, but it probably would do that by default anyways. So let's just run that and see if it gives us the same error, or if it hopefully will run the actual test. Okay, so it can't find. So it's
bubble preset. Cannot find bubble preset Gatsby package. Does it have it here in the packages?
Yeah, let's take a look. Maybe we need to run.
Oh, it's missing some packages.
Yeah, let's go into that. Since you're already in that folder, yeah, let's run npm install in the Gatsby source Drupal folder. Maybe there's some things that need to be installed here.
Yarn install or npm? It's okay, npm?
Yep, just np. Well, if you whatever you're using locally. So if you're using if
Okay.
you've been using npm, I would stick with that rather than switching back and forth.
Okay.
But the good news is that that means your global version of Jest was giving us the same error. So you should be able to just type in Jest and it should just work. So while this is running, do we want to, maybe it's going to be quicker than I thought. The other thing that we're going to need to, and I don't know that we will necessarily want to go through this, but we could also improve the tests further by trying to figure out a way to make sure, because ideally we would want the test to be able to tell us if it's a public file, that the auth object would be passed in if there was, basic auth. But if it was not a public file, if it was S3 or some other file system, that there would be no auth object. Now that might be a little tricky because we'd have to mock that basic auth configuration, but it would be possible. I don't know if we'll have time to get through all that, but we can maybe at least talk about it a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
See if the Jest works. Yeah, it passed.
Great. So just to confirm, can we take out that value attribute and run it again and just make sure we get the same error, which it should, but it would be good to make sure we're seeing the same error we saw from that we got when we looked at the GitHub pull request.
Yeah. So I'll just take this. Yeah.
Yep, and so that looks like the exact same error we saw when we were looking at the log online. So that's good. So at the minimum, we fixed the problem we were having. So if you just push this up as is, that should allow all the tests to now pass.
Okay,
but I would say, I would say that since we're already in the tests, it would be a really good idea if we could improve it by just at minimum adding another S3 file, so we can just make sure that one would pass too. Even though,
would you like me to commit and push so we see that it passes and then fix it in the meantime?
You can do a commit now and push it, and then we can work on this other one as that's, because the tests do take a while. I don't think they might not even finish by the time we're done with the stream, but
okay. So
I guess it depends. I know sometimes they can take a while to actually run through all the tests.
The problem is okay, maybe I'll fix it later. I don't know why it doesn't. Okay.
Yeah, and you might want to make sure we don't see that password though.
For sure. Yeah, you want.
Looks like I wasn't able to see anything, so.
It's on GitHub. No, it's on GitHub. Sure. Okay, doesn't matter. I'll look at it later.
Yeah, so essentially once you push up that commit, that's going to update the PR. All those tests are going to re-kick off, and this time I'm pretty confident everything will pass. So at minimum, we got the test fixed, but since we're already in there, we might as well try to improve the test a little bit. So I think adding an additional mock data that looks like it's sourced from S3 would be a good test to make sure that I don't think that will break anything, but it'd be good to test, and then we have
Let's
some extra
try.
data to test with.
Okay, so I'm going to add a file number 3 with ID number 3. Call it third image.
And then what does the object from S3 typically look like? Because I don't know, because it normally wouldn't be in site's default files, right? If it's from S3. So maybe we need to look at the command line object that you'd printed out. We can pull
For sure.
pull the structure from that.
So something like that.
Okay, so and yeah, I don't know, we can maybe, yeah, that doesn't, that should be good. Yeah, and then just make it so it's third image.png. That value doesn't actually, well, maybe it'll actually get used, but
okay, like so.
all right, now if we go back to the index.js file, let's look at the tests again.
Sure.
How that actually runs. We can kind of walk through that. So if you go down a little bit to where so essentially it's going to create remote file node, line 21, and then it's going to source some nodes, or it's pulling in requiring some files here. So if we go down to, there should be some checks that actually check that the files were downloaded, I think. So right there. So line
This
60.
one here. No?
Yep.
Download
line
files.
60. Yep. Line 60, though, there's also some checks that we'll want to add in.
60.
Yeah. So you see how there's right there on line 60, it's expecting file-1 to be defined. So we'll probably want to add in a check just to make sure that we're expecting file 3 to be defined as well, since we're creating it now. So all that's doing is, so when Gatsby sources that data, it's creating internally in Gatsby's process, it's creating these different nodes. So using the ID from the data. So there should be 3 file nodes that were created once the source nodes process runs.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look down, so there are some other places where file-1 and file-2 are changed. I don't think we necessarily need to do anything with those now, but it looks like those are relationships that are created by some of the other mock data. So the way Drupal works is it sources it'll pull the files in, but anytime if you had nodes such as articles or any other content type that used file fields, it would be added to this relationships piece. So just to take a quick look at how that works, if you go to under the fixtures folder in Gatsby source Drupal in the tests, go to article or article 2, just so we can see how those files are referenced. So that one looks like under relationships, there's a main image, but there's no data.
Yeah.
But if we go to this next one, you can see
field main image, and that's the relation for file that connects between the article and file 1.
Exactly. Yep. And so then there's a test that verifies that this article 2 has file 1 attached to it. So I don't know that we necessarily have to go through adding that. Maybe if we have time, we can improve the test a little more, but just know that that's how, if we're adding a third file, we could maybe add an article that attached that S3 file, and we could verify that existed. Not only did the file get downloaded, but it was actually attached to the article.
Sure.
But let's just start with just verifying that the file actually gets downloaded.
Okay, so to go down to the test of downloading file here, download file, this one.
Yeah, and so you can see how in this test, it's defining some URLs
Mm-hmm.
and then it's going to map over those and actually create those URLs. So base URL would be the URL to the Gatsby site, and then the file URL is the. So this probably is not going to work.
Yeah, because it doesn't create, I think, the URL is not going to be the same.
So the way that it works, if we go to file.json. So the first one was just taking the value from that URL field and adding it into that array that was getting mapped over. But since this is a actual, this is actually a full URL, not just kind of the end path to the image, it might not work.
You want to try to run it?
So if we run it now, I think it's going to pass.
Because we didn't add it here.
Because it's not actually added, it's not actually going to test for it. I mean, we can confirm that quick. I think, you know, we could save that file.json, we can run it. It's not going to break, but it's actually not testing that it's working yet. So we need to update that test to actually be able to check that file. So we can try pasting that URL into that, but I don't think that's going to work. But we can give it a go, see what happens.
Let's see. Passed?
No, it said it passed. And download files. Huh, interesting. Okay, so I think I feel like the data wouldn't look the way we would expect it to. Maybe we should maybe we can add a console.log just to.
What happens here? Why do I get?
Oh, is it?
What's the problem here?
It probably wants a trailing comma, maybe.
Insert.
Yeah, the linter will want you to put a comma in there.
Okay.
Okay, so it's taking that file URL and the base URL. I'm just wondering, it doesn't quite seem. I think that the object is going to have the right value. I'm just wondering if it's.
Want to check what happens here and create remote file node?
Can you go right? Actually, go. I don't know how this works, but on line 153, after line 153, let's add a line.
Yeah.
And let's just console.log what that URL is once. Just to see what that looks like. Hopefully this will still print.
Okay, URL is fixtures.
Okay, so it's not actually referring to the local URL though. So that was kind of what I was, because ideally this S3 file would still be pulled in locally, right? So then you'd still process it with Gatsby image.
Can you repeat? I didn't understand.
Oh, yep. Yeah, so the test is working, but I don't know that's actually testing for what we would really want to test for, because if this third file, we would actually want it to be pulled in to Gatsby so you could process it with Gatsby image or do whatever you would with it. So you'd want it to be local.
Yes.
But I guess let's go back to maybe I'm overthinking this. Let's go back to the file real quick, just to make sure. Let's see what base URL is. So base URL is would be the URL to your Drupal site. So I guess maybe that's actually probably correct, because that HTTP://fixture is actually just the fake URL that would typically be in your Gatsby source Drupal config. So I think I might have been leading us down the wrong path here. I think it actually is working the way it's intended to. I think I was just thinking about it wrong.
So you think it actually tries to download this file, that it finds it under the fixtures here, and it actually processes it?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't actually download the file because the file doesn't exist. It downloads.
For sure, yeah. It takes the object and
Right.
simulates the download.
Yeah, and so I was thinking about that incorrectly, because that if you go back to where we have the console logs, that base URL, that HTTP://fixture is just a mock base URL, but that would be pointing to your Drupal site, which is what you'd want, because then it would download that data from your Drupal, or download that file from your Drupal site. But the third one, we wouldn't want, we don't want fixture there, because we want it to actually go out to S3, download the file from S3. And at this point, Gatsby would be able to use that URL to go ahead and download that file. So I think
it's actually correct.
Yeah, so I think it's correct. Does that seem correct to you?
Yes, seems correct. The question is, I think, if this fixture, this one that we added, does it actually is it being checked, this value?
And yeah, that
if that file is processed, like we know that. I didn't go through the test. I don't know what's happening here with the expect create remote file node, and then all these tests here. But from what we saw, the previous test, that's where it failed, right? It failed on download files.
Yes.
So this is actually the part that uses the fixtures.
Yep. It
uses
is.
This one.
So it is the one. So if we go back to the normalized file that you had been working on, that we changed and then caused the errors, and let's scroll up just a little bit, because so this is downloading the file. So you can see this is the download file function. We can kind of go through
console log. If I put a console log here, I should see my file that we added to the fixture.
Yeah, let's go ahead and
right.
Well, let's try it. I don't know that let's give it a shot. Because that should actually go through and test it. So yeah, you should be able to see the file URL for those two of those three files should get there. But the first one wouldn't. Looks like it's.
I think it's working.
It's getting printed a few times.
Yeah, because probably a few tests use it.
Yeah. Yep, probably. So, but if you look at it, it's not as we would expect. It's not hitting that part with the very first image, the main image, because it doesn't have that object for the URI. But the second and the third image are hitting that point in the code. Now, we don't really have any specific tests that are testing if the basic auth works, but I think that's kind of a bit of a rabbit hole, because we need to mock that basic auth object. So we could certainly do it, but we'd have to, it might be a little trickier to come up with a good test for that one, at least in the next 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's something to think about maybe after, to see how this test could be added.
Yeah, from me, I think this is, once we get all the console logs out there and you push up that change to that file, that JSON, it looks good to me where it's mergeable as is. But I think it is something to think about, that we might, if we have some time, it would be good to add an actual check to make sure that the auth part gets sent to Drupal if it's a Drupal file, and doesn't get sent, or is it sent as an empty object if it's a non-Drupal file system.
So I assume, if I look at this code here, it goes through all the URLs and it checks if create remote file node was called with, and expects it will be called with this object that contains the URL.
Yeah, because during the during the, if you go up, there's going to be way at the
Looking for
top, way
this?
at the top where, yeah, so create file node should be because of the,
Here, the just. Looking for this?
yeah. I'm just looking at how that's, yeah, how that's all initiated there. So essentially create file node would be called with all of the data from that files.json file.
Is it here the create file node or not? Yeah, it's here. Create file.
Yep.
I see. So that's actually the test that we should be checking. If the URL here, see, that's the basic auth. So if the auth is also called with what we expect, then we pass the test. Because here in the index, let's see the way it's running.
So the only thing that that create file node gets called with all three of those URLs. So that's kind of just like a very broad way to check if create remote file node was called with those three different paths. So it does, because each of those files is created. So we could add a check here and say we want it to be called with an empty auth, but it's not going to match one-to-one. Where I'm trying to think of how to best explain this.
I understand. I think I would suggest, like, if we had another download files with basic auth, like another test.
Oh yeah, that would probably be, yep, let's try that. That's a great idea.
Like that. So
Yep.
we try this, and then we have actually the test here would be without. Let's just divide it to two parts. I don't know, maybe I'll find a way to do it better later, but
yep.
Let's assume that we have basic auth and we have only a URL with S3. So the basic auth here, how is it called? Auth? The auth
It would be
object.
auth. Yep, auth object would be empty. So
Yeah,
you should be able to do colon and then an empty object there, I think. Because you should be able to put in, yeah, just like that.
And the auth, maybe I don't know if I should define it somewhere. What's that?
I think if you leave it like that, this test should pass.
Yes. Like this.
Yeah.
Let's try.
Now I don't know. We still have to figure out a way how to make sure we pass in the auth data, but so that's passing as we would expect it to.
Do we see it here somewhere?
It
here
would be,
it is.
yep, download files with basic auth. So now, so that one should actually be called without basic auth. And we might, so because we're not actually passing in any basic auth from Drupal, so maybe we could probably think of a better name than just download files with basic auth. But unless, are we going to do you want to run another test right below this one, or how do you want to do this?
Well, I was thinking, where's the part here? I'm not sure that here's the right way to place the auth option from the Gatsby source Drupal. Yeah,
and that's where I'm a little hung up as well, as I'm trying to figure out how do we mock that, because we're running tests on, but we should be able to mock it the same way that base URL is mocked, right? So base URL is mocked to just fixture. So we need to figure out if we scroll up to where base URL is defined, let's see where that gets created at. Because somewhere they mock that data. So we just need to mock some kind of auth object. And then we should be able to use that auth object and make sure it gets passed in to create through the create remote file node.
Let's see if there's an auth here in the tests. No.
So let me go ahead and see if I'm going to pull up the code quick and take a quick look. So if we go up to line, I think like 29.
29.
So you see where it says base URL here, and that base URL that's the same as if you were to put in, it's because I'm pretty sure with Gatsby source Drupal, the only thing you need to add to your Gatsby config is a base URL, and then you can choose to add basic auth, right?
True, yeah.
So that base URL is basically a mock base URL that would come in your Gatsby config. So what we really want to do is we want to add an object there, probably for basic auth. And yeah, let's call it basic auth just so it matches the exact key in the Gatsby config.
Okay, let's see. So it's like basic auth, like so.
Yep, exactly. And then there's a username and a password. And it doesn't really matter what we put there, I don't think, for the values. And it's username. Now I'm just getting this from the Gatsby source Drupal documentation. But it's username, all lowercase, and then some kind of username, and then password, all lowercase, some kind of password.
Okay, and now we need to find a way out to send this basic auth.
Yes.
The
So
configuration.
I think if we go down a little further, you can see where it sources the nodes there.
Plugin options here.
Yeah, so it passes in the base URL there. So we couldn't, pass this mock base authentication as well.
Like this. Right?
Yeah, let's give it a shot. I mean, let's just run it and see if it still sources the nodes correctly.
Okay, and now we can remove the bug fix and see if it fails. Okay,
so we might need to look at our download files test, because it would be good to add a test. We had one that tested for an empty auth object. It would be a good idea to add a test. So if it's a public file, there's the actual auth object we're expecting. So in line,
if I comment it out, it should fail, right? If our text is correct.
It should fail because it should no longer be an empty auth object. So this test should fail, and then I would suggest it'd be good to add one more.
Sure. Yeah, so it failed.
Yeah,
it
so
failed in the. Let's see if it failed on the right. It failed on the right test.
Exactly, because it's perfect, because it's looking for that empty auth object, and now we're passing in some actual authentication values.
Right. So we can add another test now, if you like.
Yeah, let's add one more to test that a public file would actually pass the right auth, and then I think this is going to be pretty good.
So we're looking for download files with basic auth, and then download files. I can add to this list here another one, the URL. Right?
No, because the only reason you can't do that is because I think when it does this, it expects create remote file node to be called with that specific URL, and then down below you have one that, because you're not going to want to pass in an empty auth object for this next one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Because you're going to want.
That's why we duplicated this test.
Right.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna have another one, and we call it download files without basic auth. Download S3 files without basic auth. No.
Yes. Yeah. So I would say download S3 files without basic auth, and then download Drupal files with basic auth.
Okay, so download S3 without basic auth, and then.
And so that was. Yep. So that's the one.
Situation before.
Yep. And so now we want to go up and add URLs on the one above it, on the test above, I think.
Here.
Yeah. So add those other. You should be able to add, I think, both those other URLs from up above, and it should pass, right? Looks like we have about 5 minutes remaining on the stream too, so hopefully we can It'd be good if we can get this test to show.
So you want me to, I duplicate the entire test, right?
Yep. So just replace the URLs there with those other two.
Yeah, like so, and to replace the URLs with those two.
Yes. Yep, that looks good. And so then, but we want the auth object to be
full of the actual
yes.
config.
Yep. So you want to put in the actual data that the auth object's going to have, which is
this.
that fake username and password that we created.
Where is it? Download Drupal 7 basic auth would be this. That would be the test.
Yeah, let's give that a run.
What failed? Download S3 without basic auth. Ah, that's the one I duplicated. But I didn't download this one. S3 files without basic auth.
What is the because that one was working from before, I thought, right?
I'm not sure.
Did
no,
you?
I added another one.
I'll go back to your normalized file. Go back to
Download
normalize.
file.
Nope, the changes we made. Did you uncomment those changes?
Ah, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Right.
So I think that's it. Yeah. So we need to actually put your fix back in. So that was a good test if it failed when we didn't have the fix, right? I think that. Oh, you're cutting out a little bit. Internet slowing down for me.
Ah, I see. Because this one doesn't have the public.
Yep. So maybe we just need the.
Correct? Ah, no. This. Ah, okay. It wants the auth.
All right. Well, it looks like we've lost Yaron, unfortunately.
Right when it was going to finish, too.
I know. Wow.
It was so perfectly timed.
I know. I was getting very excited that it was going to finish just on the right timing. But we were very close. Very close.
Yes. And we have the link so we can watch those updates in the PR and see it get merged after the stream.
Yep.
Great. Yeah,
Well,
it's close. So I think we should be getting merged here pretty quick, I would guess.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Shane. Thanks, Madeline. Thank you, Steve, for captioning. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And if you don't already follow the Gatsby Twitch channel, now is a good time to do that. We have a web creators stream tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, and that'll be about scripting an interactive UI with third-party API. It's a little more beginner content, but hey, it might be worth checking out. So that's it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.